I'm really afraid that we're going to see just a more and more empowered gangs that are going to continue to try and expand their territorial control. And soon there will be very little left of a state to work with in Haiti.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. Over the past few weeks, the situation in Haiti has gone from bad to worse. On November 10th, the interim Prime Minister of Haiti, Conille, was fired by the council that put him in charge in May. That transitional council was established with heavy U.S. and international support after Haiti's Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, was unable to re-enter the country following a foreign trip. He submitted a resignation letter from Los Angeles. Henry took power following the 2021 assassination of the prime minister that preceded him. So, needless to say, Haiti has been in a perpetual political crisis since 2021, and in that political vacuum, organized criminal groups, commonly referred to as gangs, have asserted control over large swaths of Port-au-Prince, fomenting a security and humanitarian crisis throughout the country. In response to this crisis, the United States and other key international players, with the consent of the Haitian government and the backing of the United Nations, established what is known as the Multinational Security Support Mission, the MSS. This mission is led by a contingent of police from Kenya, and for a short while after their deployment, levels of violence decreased and humanitarian access increased. But in the wake of the firing of the interim prime minister on November 10th, violence has exploded sharply. According to my guest today, Renata Segura of the International Crisis Group, gangs have sought to take advantage of the political vacuum in Haiti to assert their control and dominance. These gangs now control nearly all of Port-au-Prince, including neighborhoods that were once under the control of the Haitian police, and they are quickly spreading to the countryside. In our conversation, Renata Segura explains the shifting contours of this violence and what can be done to increase security in Haiti. She also discusses debates underway to make this multinational security support mission a formal UN peacekeeping mission and the advantages and disadvantages of that strategy. For those of us in the United States, should the crisis in Haiti continue to escalate at the pace and scale it is at the moment, we can very well expect this to have increasing political relevance as the new Trump administration takes office in just a few months. This conversation will give you good background to understand the context in which this violence is occurring. As always, please reach out to me if you have suggestions of people I should interview or topics I should cover. Also, if you listen to this podcast week in, week out, please do consider supporting our work with a paid subscription. Every subscription payment goes a very long way. We keep our overhead really low here in order to deliver to you the best content we can, and I so appreciate you taking a moment to make a paying subscription to Global Dispatches. You can do so at globaldispatches.org, or if you're listening directly in Apple Podcasts, just a few taps of your thumb will let you pay us for our work. Thank you. Now, here is my conversation with Renata Segura, Program Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the International Crisis Group. So, Renata, on Sunday, November 10th, the Transitional Council in Haiti dismissed the interim Prime Minister, Conille. Since then, there has been a escalating spiral of violence and destruction that has wrought much of Haiti. Can I just have you explain and describe what has been going on since the dismissal of Gary Conille? And we're speaking on Friday, November 15th. What's happened this week?
Yeah, so this has been quite an intense week, both in politics but also in security in Haiti. The dismissal of Conille was not really a surprise for anybody who had been following closely what's going on in the politics of Haiti. There had been an increasing tension between him and the presidential council. We should note that the presidential council has 9 members and a rotating presidency. The relationship between the Prime Minister Conille, who was just dismissed, and the current president was really difficult. There was a lot of fighting over who really was in control of the government, who should be the representative speaking to the international community, and a number of other things. When the dismissal came, it wasn't a surprise, but it's obviously something that just makes the state weaker, at least momentarily, and the gangs clearly took that as a sign to really prove that they can raise the levels of violence and really paralyze the country again if they want to and when they want to. What the gangs want is for the government to sit in a negotiation table with them. Even though it's not exactly clear what is the end goal that the gangs have for this negotiation, they do want to be seen as essentially counterparts for the government to talk to them and do some kind of distribution of power in which they would be benefited. So what we saw was a couple of things in terms of security. On the one hand, they shot at 3 different flights that were either departing or landing.
Yeah, there's like a Spirit Airlines flight that apparently was like hit by armed fire and had to make an emergency landing in Dominican Republic.
And we have information that they also shot at an American Airlines flight. We don't know if it was hit or not, but at least 3 flights were shot at. And so the FAA prohibited any American airline to fly into Haiti for a month, which obviously is something that crucially affects the island because the majority of the flights are those that come from Florida. And then the gangs also started to ramp up their attempts to control neighborhoods in Port-au-Prince that had been able to keep them out. As we know, the gangs control around 80% of Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, but there were certain areas of the city that the community, with the help of the police, had been organizing to not allow them in. And for example, one of those, Solino, where we had been seeing increasing fighting in the last several weeks, is now under control of the gangs. Something that is important to note is that now the gangs are really trying to expand outside of Port-au-Prince. So they're not only contained in the capital, but they're going into the Artibonite Valley, which is an area where they had been present for a while, but now going into new cities in the south.
So, I mean, what you're describing just sounds like the gangs acting very strategically and also opportunistically, are seeking to exert their power in the midst of a even weaker government.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting to note that the gangs are very aware of what's happening in national politics, and they clearly react at moments when they perceive that the government is especially weak. But also, they react to whenever they hear that the multinational support mission, which is this Kenyan-led mission of policemen and some military that have come to help the Haitian National Police, whenever there is word that a new deployment of people is going to come, or there's going to be some attempt to change the mission, they flex their muscle. They're trying to send a signal to the international community that they are going to be a very difficult actor to contend with.
And that raises another reason why it's sort of strategically in the gang's interest to obstruct flights, right, into Port-au-Prince, because there was supposed to be another flight of Kenyan troops that were to deploy.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, the troops don't necessarily come on commercial aviation, so it's not
Sure.
that they won't have a way to fly. But the Kenyans are understandably very concerned about their flights being shot at from the ground. And this is something that from our conversations with Kenyans, representatives of the government, it's not what's making the decision to deploy more people, happen or not, but it is something that they're calculating. I mean, for now, the real main concern is a funding issue. There is not enough money for the mission to deploy in its entirety. So that is sort of the main reason why we're not seeing more officers coming to Haiti. But clearly, the attacks to the airport is something to be considered by them.
So I wanted to ask you about this Kenyan-led multinational support mission. You and I have spoke about this before. It seems, at least from what I've read, that initially the deployment did result in a, somewhat reduction of violence and chaos in Haiti. But now, of course, the destruction and violence in Haiti is at a newly unprecedented level. Can you just describe what these troops have been doing and how many troops are we talking about right now? And by troops, I should say police.
It's interesting because even though the mission was really conceived as a police mission, we have been seeing some few countries send military members, and this actually has become a bit of a internal problem. So essentially, we have around 380 people right now on the ground. The great majority of those are Kenyan police, but they are Kenyan special forces. So they're technically members of the police, but these are highly trained forces. So it's not like your regular police that is just, doing day-to-day patrolling in Nairobi, but it's a group of people that have been trained in particular for these kinds of more high level confrontations. And then we've also had some deployments from Jamaica and from Belize, and those have been actually military, but we're only talking about a handful of people in each of those cases. The expectation had been that by now we would have around 2,500 people on the ground, which is something that is reasonable considering that the gangs have around 12,000 members. But unfortunately, there has been not enough funding. The US has provided the majority of the funding for the mission, but a lot of that was spent on creating the infrastructure needed. They need to have a place where the forces are going to stay overnight, have the minimum equipment, all that. And then Canada has been the second donor. France, much, much smaller. This week, Germany also contributed. But in general, it has not reached anywhere, to the target numbers that the Kenyans were hoping and expecting.
So because of these funding constraints, there has been a move to transition and make this Kenyan-led multinational support mission a formal United Nations peacekeeping mission. And with that designation comes a reliable stream of funding, because the way UN peacekeeping missions work is that each member state of the United Nations has mandatory dues that they pay towards the UN peacekeeping that gets collected and then dispersed to various peacekeeping missions. So as opposed to relying on voluntary funding and the goodwill of the United States and Canada, and to a lesser extent France and Germany, you would have a regular stream and source of funding for this. I know this is something that you've written about in a recent crisis group report. Can you just describe and explain the contours of this discussion and where things stand now in terms of making this Kenyan-led force a UN peacekeeping force?
Yeah, so essentially, the US, I think, for the last several months has realized that their efforts to mobilize a bigger group of countries to support the MSS is actually not materializing. And to be very fair, besides the question of money, there is also the question of know how, right? Creating a mission such as the MSS, which is sort of detached from any institutional know how that the UN has, right? That understands properly how to function with the monies and the deployment and make sure that all the boxes are checked for this to be an effective operation, has led them to think that it would be better if the UN actually was leading the operation. For clarification, the Security Council did approve the mission, but it's not ever been a blue helmet operation. It's always been a Kenyan-led.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. This is quote unquote UN backed because the Security Council did approve it, but They approved it more as like a way to show international support, not because it's a peacekeeping mission.
And I think a lot of people often refer to the UN mission, and
Yeah.
that is technically not correct. I think the transition to a peacekeeping operation would be accurate to use that term. So when the mission for the MSS was renewed in October of, a couple months ago, the US had tried to actually insert some language in that resolution to start the transition towards a peacekeeping operation. But China and Russia were very opposed to this idea. They broke silence on the draft a couple of times. And so the resolution that ended up being approved was completely devoid of any language about that moving into a PKO.
What are China and Russia's objections here? Because for the most part, this has been one area in which Security Council has been able to cooperate despite heightened geopolitical tensions elsewhere. There has been generally a consensus around how to deal with Haiti at the Security Council, but this seems to be a point of contention. What are China and Russia's objections to making this a peacekeeping mission?
I mean, Russia has been the most outspoken about the objections. And to be fair, they're not fully unreasonable. Essentially, the Russians are saying, look, we have not given the opportunity for the MSS to really show if it will work or not, because it hasn't been funded and it hasn't been deployed in its totality. So it would be better to just go with that already exists. It's also saying in Haiti, it wouldn't be the traditional context for a peacekeeping operation, right? In the way in which the council normally speaks, they're saying there really is no peace to keep, because what is expected from the MSS and then would be expected from a peacekeeping operation is a much more proactive, kinetic operations to go into the strongholds where the gangs are and engage militarily with them by force and try to either kill or capture a lot of these gang members, right? And take control of territory, protect the infrastructure, but also really engage in combat. And that is something that has not been so successful in other peacekeeping operations, and that a lot of the members in the council see with some hesitation if a peacekeeping operation should go there. So they're saying, nothing has shown us that a peacekeeping operation would be able to do better than what's happening with the MSS at the moment.
I mean, I think it's fair to say, as someone who's covered the UN for many, many years, that UN peacekeeping has many successes all around the world. That does not include Haiti, which has been a succession of peacekeeping failures. So, this hesitation towards transitioning the MSS to a blue helmet operation is, I think, understandable in many quarters.
Yes. I mean, it is unfortunate. I think the conversation has led to the peacekeeping option, not because it is the best that is fit for purpose, but really because we have no other options.
Yeah.
And obviously, just leaving the situation as it stands in Haiti is not really a possibility, right? Like if the gangs, which we think had been sort of, not fighting on purpose, they had been in a wait and see mode, decide that now they're going to go all in, we could be talking about a failed state in Haiti completely, right? We haven't seen a wave of immigration just yet, but this is something that could happen. Most of the migrants have been trying to go into the DR. But, in the past, we have seen a lot of people taking on boats to try and reach Florida. And that's something that could be happening if the violence gets even worse than what it is.
Just imagine the political implications of that here in the United States, a new Trump administration, a DeSantis administration in Florida. He's Ron DeSantis, a hard right governor of Florida, and like how that would impact political discussions here in the United States vis-a-vis proper policies towards Haiti. That would upend any sort of notion of a coherent policy towards Haiti.
Yeah, I mean, and I cannot obviously speak for U.S. Government at this point of what's in their heads, but one can imagine that the part of the intention to move this into a PKO was anticipating the possibility of a Trump administration that would certainly will be less gung-ho about underwriting the costs of the MSS, in which the Biden administration has been really quite committed to, and they have done things such as going over congressional blocks of funding, Secretary Blinken just decided to push ahead with that despite congressional opposition. So the Biden administration has really put a lot of efforts into, having the MSS succeed. I have my doubts that a Trump administration would be of a similar mind.
Yeah.
However, and obviously there's a lot of speculation about what the Trump administration will do now, we do know that for the Republicans, the question of migration is a hugely important one, and they do want to stop migrants from coming. There's been all these terrible xenophobic remarks against Haitians in particular. So it's worrisome
Mm-hmm.
from multiple angles to imagine like an increase on the migration from Haiti. So it could be that the Trump administration decides, what, it's better to actually support a peacekeeping mission so that the conditions do not worsen and we don't have to face a migratory wave.
Mm-hmm.
That said, we also know how Trump feels about the UN. So I think they're going to have to be weighing different considerations.
So I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is that these gangs, and they work under an umbrella known as Vive Ensemble, or like live together, and they have like a coherent structure between them. There is an alliance of gangs that is the kind of key driver of this instability right now. That they're doing what they're doing now because they want a seat at the table. They want to negotiate directly with the government. So here's my question to you. At what point does it make sense to kind of recharacterize these groups as quote unquote gangs to something more akin to like the de facto opposition? Give them that patina of legitimacy they seek in order to bring them to the table, in order to get a reduction of violence. Is that something that like analysts like you and others are considering?
Oh my God, Mark, this is the question of the $1 million and the one that we have
That's
been
why they
spent.
pay me the big bucks, Renata.
Yes, I mean, it's very complicated because I think you're totally right. The name gangs does not really start to describe what's happening in Haiti, right? And we normally think about gangs as like the Maras Salvatruchas or the people in LA. That's not what we're talking about here. These are really more akin as just criminal groups that we see in other parts of Latin America. The part that is particularly tricky about initiating conversations, and in crisis group, we're very favorable to actually talk to everybody because it is normally the way in which violence is reduced or ends. The tricky part here is that these gangs have historical and very deep ties with both political and business elites who had for decades mobilized them when they needed something to be done that would favor them. Would that be bringing people to the polls, actually dissuading people from voting for a specific candidate, maybe actually help them in with some business arrangements of some sort? So it's not so easy to think about the gangs as an autonomous group that would come to the negotiating table and speak just for themselves. But there are all of these complicated links that, even though we've seen the gangs gaining autonomy, certainly in the last 2 years, they still have these connections. And we know that some of the attacks of recent weeks have been maybe pushed by specific actors who might, gain from the chaos. So that is complicated. That said, it does seem impossible to think that we're going to resolve the question of violence in Haiti without really having conversations with them. I mean, to be very clear, negotiations with the gangs happen every day in Haiti. If you don't engage in negotiations, aid wouldn't be reaching the communities, people wouldn't be able to enter, the majority of the capital, et cetera, et cetera. So even high level officials in Haiti, it's pretty well known that there are under the table negotiations. But we also have learned from other places in Latin America and elsewhere that those informal under the table negotiations are not sustainable and they usually end up not well. So the question is, can we create a space for these negotiations to happen in a more formal manner? Haitians themselves seem very opposed to the
Mm,
idea because of the amount of harm that the gangs have inflicted on the population. And it's very understandable. A lot of them really, really recoil at the idea of giving them any amnesty because of the nature of the crimes. They've been killing people, raping women and children. Like, it's just
yeah.
really been so, so awful. and the humanitarian crisis that they have triggered is just a really heartbreaking situation. But I think as time goes by and the situation only worsens, and there is some sense that really this is not going to be a problem that will be only resolved by force, I think there's more and more opening in Haiti and obviously in the partners abroad about how to really engage with the gangs in a way that would be productive.
Well, just to that point, at the outset of the conversation, you described a situation that seems to be headed towards the point in which the gangs control, all of Port-au-Prince and much of the surrounding area. Like, at what point are they just not the de facto authorities that you have to negotiate and deal with in order to bring about like a modicum of a reduction of violence and a more broad-based peace agreement or cessation of hostilities agreement that would allow peacekeepers to attend? You said there is no peace to keep. Presumably, in order to broker that peace, you're going to need to deal with the potential soon to be de facto authorities there.
Absolutely. I mean, and they are the de facto authorities. I don't know if you heard about this terrible massacre that occurred on 3 October in a town called Pont-Sunday, where the gangs entered at dawn and killed at least 115 people, including children, old people, babies, etc. And they did this because the community had refused to continue to be extorted for using the main road that crosses the town. The gangs had just created checkpoints in which everybody had to pay. So they are the authority, right? And the problem is that when they face resistance, then they can really hurt the population. So I think very soon there's going to be, like, I think a consensus in Haiti that the only way to deal with these groups is, at least momentarily, to try and engage with them. The problem here is that, as opposed to the FARC or other groups, it's not super clear what they would want. There are a few characters within the gangs, for example, Jimmy Cherissier, Barbecue, who has political ambitions and he has said he would like to be a member of the government. I mean, I really doubt that the international community would allow somebody like him to become a minister. I think Haitians would be horrified by that thought. But there are some that have some political ambitions that might be resolved. Obviously, the problem here, which is the problem that we're seeing throughout Latin America and other places, including Colombia, is what can the government offer a group that is actually gaining so much money from illicit ways? There's a little bit of drug trafficking, clearly weapons trafficking, but also just extortion and kidnap. What can the government offer them that would be their while? It would be worth their while to actually engage in this conversation. And I think that's why there's a lot of people thinking about how to engage the gangs to really come up with some ideas of what they would want in order to agree to demobilize, right? I think that is the part that is particularly blurry in Haiti at the moment and makes this very difficult.
So, look, we're speaking Friday, November 15th. Things seem to be getting worse by the hour. In the next like week or so, what are you looking towards that will suggest to you, what the next iteration of this crisis might be?
I mean, we're hoping to see that this new configuration of the transitional government with the new prime minister actually works a little bit better. The really intense political bickering of the last few weeks has really impeded conversations for the government to work effectively. Hopefully what happens is that a few more countries, such as what happened with Germany recently, speed up contributions and that the next deployment of Kenyans can arrive. President Ruto has said that there's at least 400 more policemen that are ready to come if the funds are available. So hopefully the MSS can really start targeting, I think, even just a symbolic gain of taking over a main part of Port-au-Prince that has been in territory controlled by the gangs, or capturing a big gang member, something that really shows that the gangs are not just running the place however they want, and that there is a proper resistance from the state with the help of the international community. If we don't see that happening soon, I'm really afraid that we're going to see just a more and more empowered gangs that are going to continue to try and expand their territorial control. And soon there will be very little left of a state to work with in Haiti.
Well, Renata, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you, as always, for your time. This is really helpful.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.